It is our favorite time of year when we change our clocks back. And what does that do to our health? How can we avoid it? Is the topic of our conversation today. Really not avoid it, but deal with it. I am grateful for my friend Dagny, who is here with me. She's an amazing sleep researcher, friend, colleague, specialty provider at Nature Health and Wellness, where I practice. And we've done a lot of collabing together. And with we're recording this on the 4th of March. In 4 days, we're going to be turning our clocks ahead and losing an hour of sleep and shifting everything out of whack. Why do we do that from your perspective?
I actually don't know the history super well. I do know that it was not a medical based decision, though. I think it was an agricultural political decision that was made in our country.
Mm-hmm.
And not every state in our country does this. So I know Arizona is a state that has never actually adopted it, or maybe adopted it at one point and then got rid of it again. Which is interesting, right? To know that there's like a state in the middle of our country that like doesn't prescribe to this time zone change can throw things off. Um, so yeah, it's not a medical decision. It's not based off of evidence. It's not based off of science. It's not based off of what we know of health and well-being. And in fact, quite to the contrary, we have a huge body of research to show that this is really bad for us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting to think back of like where did this idea even come from? And from my research and just from like what I've learned over the years, I think it was actually Benjamin Franklin way
Really?
back when. In the one resource I'm showing is says 1784, suggesting that if we woke up earlier in the summer, then our daylight is longer in the later hours, then we don't need as much candles. And I think that evolved into the energy crisis in the 70s and 80s, where energy was really a big deal. Actually, might have been earlier than that. Um, and then it kind of just got codified. Like, I think it's really became from an energy perspective, which I wish it was a health decision that was creating this. And but here we are, and we have this massive shift in our bodies, in our societies, in just nature. It's all artificial, but we feel it. So I think when we are shifting, we shift, move, spring forward and fall back. I think from your perspective, I really think that the change in the spring is harder than the one in the fall.
Yeah, that's definitely accurate. So, because we're losing an hour of sleep, we know from the sleep researcher, like in general in the lab, when we look at this, when we're doing what we call a sleep restriction study, which is where we take people who are having a full 8 hour window, and then we have a people who have less than that. Typically, when we sleep restrict by 4 hours in the lab when you're doing kind of like a general sleep restriction study. Although there are plenty of studies that show if you just do as little as 1 hour of sleep restriction, you have all these different things that go on in the body, right? So the next day, our bodies are actually these a little bit confusing in terms of some of the ways that we rebound after a lost night of sleep. However, most Americans are already underslept chronically. So this is often more than just an hour of missing sleep for most folks. Um, so just wanting to name and emphasize that. But we do know like if you miss an hour of sleep, you are likely to be substantially more anxious the next day. You are likely to have more social and emotional difficulties the next day with your interpersonal relationships. Your vital signs are going to be a little bit different than on a night that you're well slept. So your heart rate will be different, your respiratory rate will be different, your ability to have a cure, like a response time is different. And particularly where we see this in the public health stats is that there are more driving accidents the day of daylight savings, actually on both times of the year, but
Hmm.
more specifically in the spring forward time. And that's because drowsy driving is actually substantially more dangerous than drunk driving is in many
Hmm.
ways, which I think surprises people who don't know the research very well. But yeah, it's a dangerous day. Be careful out there.
Yeah. So we do it on Sundays, and they it was in like April and October, and then they bumped it out like a week or two or three into March and November. I think that was 10, 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And I'm also seeing some research that talks about how when with the daylight savings, it's not just car accidents. We're also dealing with like heart attacks and like just general health things overall, like this stress of time, probably with sleep, and everything else like that.
Yeah, I'd have to look up the research that I saw, but I also think strokes go up those 2 days of the year as well, which is interesting, right? Like, I think with heart attacks, that makes a little bit more cognitive sense to me in terms of physiological systems. And so the idea that strokes would also increase just feels a little bit like even one more step removed from what I might expect. But I think that is
Mhm.
accurate that they also are pretty dramatically different on daylight savings.
Yeah. And then the research I'm looking at right now is talking about heart attacks, like acute cardiovascular events, which include strokes.
Uh-huh.
So I'm curious. Let's dissect this. Like
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
we've got we've got our autonomic nervous system that's like in the back of our brain, that's controlling our heart rate, that's controlling all these things. We've got the suprachiasmatic nucleus in the hippocampus that's regulating light, dark, all of the those things. Is it purely neurological, or do we have the adrenal cortisol circadian shifts as well? I guess I'm thinking specifically about the heart.
Yeah, we do.
Uh,
So there's a phenomena in sleep research. We typically look at it with literal jet lag, right? When someone's changing time zones because they're traveling, we're seeing physiological changes overall on the HPA axis, so that stress response system. And then we also get this, we call it social jet lag. So people who maybe have an earlier bedtime, but 1 or 2 days a week, they might stay out in order to get more social interaction. We talk about this as social jet lag because it's not insubstantial. It is something that dramatically shifts our ability to have good sleep health in some ways. And so when we're thinking about, even though it's just 1 day or 2 days out of the year where we're making this hour change, um, again, like I said, this is often more than just an hour for most people because, you know, 30% of people have diagnosable insomnia in our country. As many as predicted, about 60 to 70% of folks may be underslept or underrested in some way. So this is not a small, it seems innocuous. You're like, oh, we're just changing for an hour. But if you look at what it actually means, it's probably more than an hour for most folks. Um, and so it changes the whole body's response system. And uh, like I said, it's really obvious in our social and emotional capacities. It's really obvious in our reaction times. But there's yeah, I mean, I I think it's something too that because we have normalized it, we're also not taking any special care to tend to this as it's happening. We're basically just being told to like business as usual about it rather than being aware of how we can do this intentionally.
Yeah, and a little later, I want to dive into like actual things that we can do to
Yeah,
navigate around that. But I want to just talk nerdy stuff for a minute about all of the things that are
totally.
going on. And you're talking interestingly about the social jet lag is an interesting idea I hadn't heard of, but it makes total sense. And I think it's not uncommon for most people to have a regular routine during the week they're going to bed at a decent time, waking up at a decent time to be able to make it to work and school and everything else. But then the weekend hits and like, oh, I don't need to be anywhere Saturday or Sunday.
Yep.
So I'm going to sleep in. And therefore, because I can sleep in, I'm going to go to bed late.
Yep.
And then, oh, and by the way, daylight savings is happening on a Saturday night, Sunday morning. Like, we don't have that buffer time to even adapt to it before we hit Monday rush hour when we're driving to work and feeling drowsy.
That's exactly right. And like you said, it's these different mechanisms in the brain, right? So I don't know about you. You might be a little more conscientious than me, but I'm a sleep researcher and I forget when this happens every year. And because our phones automatically do this time change for us, I usually on that Monday am, why do I feel so tired? I actually don't usually put it together until a couple of days later because it's so ingrained into our culture. And so, I mean, yeah, there's a lot of shifts going on in that HPA axis. And our awareness of that it's happening is so underneath our normal consciousness, I think.
Mm-hmm. And so let's explore the adrenal piece because
Yeah.
our adrenal glands, they're sitting on top of our kidneys, they're producing cortisol. I would say about 90% of patients that I test their cortisol with have low cortisol. Like we
Mhm.
often think about cortisol as the stress hormone, but
Yes.
it's really our hormones, our body's ability to regulate stress, not like
Yeah.
it's responding to stress, like it kind of does, but it mostly doesn't.
Right.
And then we get this shift of cortisol.
Hmm.
Let me back up. We have this change in time. It's adding a stressor to our body. It's a physiologic stress, and if we don't have enough cortisol, we're not going to be able to adapt to that. Like we think about cortisol also with anti-inflammatory things of how it's decreasing our body's ability to manage that inflammation. And if that we're already inflamed, which if we're eating the standard American diet or like lots of just processed, wonderful tasting but not good for you foods, we're already going to have that inflammation. So the stress plus inflammation, and not even to mention the circadian rhythm generally.
Yeah, it's so interesting. And I'm so glad you're bringing up cortisol as a stress hormone regulator. It's not like something stressful happens and then our cortisol spikes. That's how I think many people talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas my understanding, what I learned in graduate school, is that cortisol is actually a negative feedback loop. So once your body feels that it is producing enough cortisol, then it shuts the cortisol production off. Um, and so when it comes to something like daylight savings, which is a stressor to the body, like you're talking about, we actually want to be able to have enough stress hormone in our body to adapt to that. That's actually what we want. And so, like you're talking,
Mm-hmm.
if we're always trying to de-inflame our body, our inflammation, I mean, of course I'm caveating this as like this is me talking in very broad strokes, but we want inflammation in our body. It is a beautiful tool. If we had a cut on our arm and it didn't have a certain amount of inflammatory response, it would also never heal.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think some of our dominant culture has so many moving parts that we are often distracted when an inflammatory response is happening appropriately. And then we think about it as global stress. When actually, whenever we have a stress response or an inflammatory response, it's usually telling us something very specific about our environment. And so, kind of going back to this idea that, like, even as a sleep researcher, I don't usually know daylight savings happened until a couple of days later while I'm trying to figure out why I feel so tired. I actually think, and I'm going to be a little hyperbolic here and use the word dangerous, but I think it's like a little dangerous that we don't manually have to reset our clocks anymore around daylight savings because then we can't actually walk our steps back and figure out why am I having a stress response to begin with, which is how we treat ourselves or how we make changes in our lives. We can't change things if we don't know where it's coming from. And I mean, coming back to sort of this idea that like it's a day in our year where there's more car crashes, more heart attacks, more strokes. It's often because we don't know to take care of it. Not that the day itself or the time changing itself is inherently bad or good. It's just like we don't have enough tools to educate ourselves on how to deal with it well.
Yeah, and I think that's the I was as I was like gearing up this week, I'm like, I need to do a video about this because it's so like under talked about. I love how you worded that we just need to bring attention to it. Like we all know that we need to sleep. I think
Yeah.
fewer of us know how to sleep well.
Hmm.
And granted, I'm going to fully acknowledge that there are physiological challenges that we many of us experience that get in the way of that.
Totally.
But I guess again, broad idea here, speaking generally, we don't know how to sleep well. I think,
Yeah.
and that's what your whole practice, your whole career is driven by is making sure we can sleep well because it's so needed.
Yeah, and when we're well slept, we can usually do better problem solving about figuring out, oh, I'm having a stress response. Oh, I'm having trouble in my relationships. Oh, I have this illness that will not heal. It gives us more capacity to then do some puzzle work for ourselves and figure out the root causes of things and not just trying to slap symptom band-aids on all the time.
Yeah.
Hmm.
One resource that I'm looking at, it talks
Yeah.
about how daylight savings time transitions can cause sleep fragmentation, reduce sleep duration, sleep latency, which means harder takes longer to fall asleep, and then just daytime sleepiness. And it can last for like a week or longer.
Yeah.
And I'm just kind of thinking back to like when I went it's probably almost 10 years ago, maybe
Uh-huh.
maybe not that long. I went on a vacation to Europe and we were only there for a week, but it seems like once you get there, it takes like a week to kind of normalize
Yes.
before you're like, okay, I can do this.
Yeah.
And then, by the way, I'm just going to get a hop on a plane and come home. Um, so from your experience, how long does it take for people to kind of adjust to either traveling or the like social jet lag or daylight savings or just these sleep changes generally?
Yeah, great question. So there's actually a formula that is the evidence-based gold star standard of that formula, which is for every hour that you are changing away from your baseline, it takes one full calendar day to adjust.
Okay.
So in theory, daylight savings is happening a full calendar day before the workday starts. So you would, in theory, if you all other conditions are stable and you are normally a good sleeper and you made sure to parse out your schedule and all these things, yeah, that one Sunday should be enough days to get back to a schedule that works for you. However, because of all these compounding effects, that's actually not that true. So this is a gold standard in a laboratory setting. I like to really caveat that for folks is when we're studying sleep in a laboratory setting, um, yes, people are going about their lives in a normal way often when we're studying these types of things, and they are just tracking certain statistics for us. They have medical equipment they take home with them. So it's not like they're in this sterile environment where they don't have adult responsibilities anymore. They still do. But people are often more conscious because they have this sleep medical device. So people are usually a little more conscientious about their behavior when they're doing sleep research.
Mm-hmm.
So it's
Yeah,
pretty
totally.
obvious material. So yeah, so let's say you're going to Europe, right? So let's talk about real jet lag. Let's say you're going to Europe and you're going to be shifting about 5 to 10 time zones over. You'd want to start preparing for that 5 to 10 days in advance and start to, if you wanted to and if your life had the flexibility, you'd want to slowly start shifting your sleep schedule an hour closer to what you wanted it to be at a time every day. So by the time you end up being there, you're already on the time zone of the place that you're traveling towards. You could also kind of split the difference, right? So if you like even just did, let's say it's 10 days on the 5 days leading up, you start to shift that a little bit. You're about halfway there, and then you'll have half as long to adjust once you get there.
Mm-hmm.
You do it like that. Um, there's also things that are pretty well known in the sleep science, and we talk about the sort of mnemonic device we use for it is flying east is a beast and flying west is the best. So it's actually substantially harder to change your time zone rhythms if you are flying to the east of wherever you started. And every time you fly to the west, it's a little bit easier to do a reset just because of the way that the sun rises and falls. So you're able to get back on a more regular schedule when you're flying
Mhm.
west.
And then with daylight savings, I guess I'm trying to apply that here. When
Yeah.
we are springing forward,
Yes.
we're kind of moving west.
Yeah, we're kind of moving west because the sun is rising early, or we're artificially changing our wake up time to be earlier,
Uh huh.
which is counterintuitive because you actually no, because that would be traveling east, right?
Right.
Yep, that would be
Yeah.
traveling east in the spring.
We're moving east because we're going back an hour, even though we're staying in the same time zone.
Yes, we're staying in the same time zone, but the east is coming to us.
Yes. And then that's why um the fall transition
Uh-huh.
is so much easier because it's as effectively as if we're moving a time zone to the west where we get that extra hour to have the sun catch up to us or us catching up to the sun, and things can be normalized a little bit better.
Yeah, that's correct. Because
Yeah.
also when we also want to think about the type of sleep that we're losing or gaining too, right? So, in general, again, broad strokes, every adult sleeper sleeps in these 90-minute cycles, but the ratio of the types of sleep that we're getting in that 90-minute cycle changes across our 8-hour window. So earlier in the evening, when we first fall asleep, we're getting substantially more slow wave sleep and a lot less REM cycle sleep.
Mm-hmm.
And the closer we are to the end of that 8-hour cycle, we get almost no slow wave sleep and we get a lot more REM cycle sleep. So the
Yep.
ratios change. And so when we are doing something like traveling or daylight savings has happened, we're actually getting our REM cycle sleep in particular is the one that gets most disrupted right away.
Yeah. And it yeah, it's just not fun either way you cut it.
No. No, and it's why I mean, the REM loss in particular is why we feel crankier about it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because that's where we're regulating our emotional centers is during that REM cycle sleep.
Yeah. So we know that daylight savings has been around for a while. At least the idea has been for a while.
Yep.
There's been some efforts in Congress to repeal it, but I think there's some debate on like, do we keep the standard
Oh,
time or do we keep the daylight time? And I think there's pros and cons. Now I'm
yeah.
curious what you think. I know for me, I was like, I could just stay right now on the standard time and be okay. But then again, I think about like long summer evenings that are really enjoyable,
Mhm.
and I like those too. But then, I was reflecting that if it went darker a little earlier in the summer, then we could watch fireworks on the 4th of July, not at 11 p.m. I don't know.
Right.
Well, I'm curious, what do you think? What would be the ideal for you? Because I know that there's some research that we can dive into that talks about what the best one is, but what do
That's
you
so
think? What
interesting. I'm actually not familiar with what the research says. I think from my background, my kind of maybe perhaps a little cynical psychology background is like people are horrible at knowing what decisions are best for them. And ultimately, our tension of how long it takes us to make a decision is usually more detrimental for our physiological health than just making one and sticking with it because we're so adaptable.
Mhm.
So, in my mind, my thoughts would be like, I think standard's probably fine. And I bet it would take less than a year for any of us to really adapt to that process. We might notice it the first year, and I would bet the second year people just sort of forget that it's changed or that it ever was a thing. It would be such
Hmm.
a blip in our human consciousness that, yeah, like it's almost funny that it's become such a huge momentous thing that like Congress has to make this change, because it's ultimately, if we made the decision one way or another, it would just stop being a thing.
Yeah.
Uh, and and I don't know. I mean, it's like all of these times feel arbitrary, so it's hard for me to even stab a guess at which one scientifically has more support for it. So,
Hmm.
what does the
So
research you've seen say?
yeah, so what I found, American Academy of Sleep Medicine advocates for permanent standard time,
Uh-huh.
not permanent daylight savings, because I think it's because it aligns better with circadian rhythm.
That makes sense to me. Yeah.
And I was thinking about that because like right now, in very, very beginning of March, I wake
Mhm.
up and by the time I'm going to work at 8 o'clock ish, like the sun is up, it's coming over the mountains and it's bright outside and it's like getting us up. And then in a week from right now, it's going to be dark. And
Yeah.
I think we really need that that extra oomph of light in the morning to
Yes,
get
I
us
think so.
going. And we need it more in the morning than we do in the evening. And because I know that many people will say, "Oh, I like to get off work and be able to have more time in the evening." But really, from a health perspective, it's going to be better for us to have that light in the morning time.
Yeah, as you're saying all this, I'm like, "Oh, yeah, of course, that makes so much sense," right? Like, all of our circadian functions for daylight waking hours are triggered by the light in the morning. We can artificially trigger them through other things like food or exercise, but they start being triggered by the light hitting our retinas, the retinas traveling that to the suprachiasmatic nucleus, and that's the cascade that actually starts the whole system up in a evolutionarily sort of, I don't want to say correct, but like um the order of operations in evolution starts that
Hmm.
way. And so yeah, that makes total sense to me. And also, just of note too, folks who tend to have seasonal affective disorder, you and I talked about this a little bit on a podcast episode that we did together for All
Yeah.
Things Vegas, or is it All Things Vegas? Is that correct?
Yeah. Hmm.
Okay. I'm like, in my head, the like words change around a little bit. But we
Yep.
talked about sort of like the winter specific seasonality and wellness. But of course, spring has its own whole set of attributes as well. And it's different for different groups of people, but the weather and the light changes in spring are a little bit more chaotic and unpredictable than in the fall. And so a lot of people, especially people who already are struggling with seasonal affective disorder, a more consistent earlier waking time that doesn't then shift in the middle of them just starting to feel better because the light is back earlier in the
Hmm.
day. I imagine that I haven't seen any, but my guess would be that there's probably research around how that shift probably makes mental health stuff difficult too.
Totally. And I did see some research about mental health and how um all mood disorders, anxiety, depression just like peaks over this. And kind of along the same lines of what we've been talking about. Like if our cortisol is out of whack,
Yep.
we're not going to be able to handle life in the same way.
No.
Um I was reflecting on, this is kind of tangential but related. One of my mentors, who I was shadowing way back in school, he was helping a kid with ADHD and talking to them about how one of the strategies for helping kids with ADHD is that their brains are not fully awake. Like
Yes.
they're not able to like process and everything because their brains haven't woken up yet. So what he suggested is go stand outside, stare at the sun for 10 minutes before you go to school. But if it's dark outside,
Yep.
and certainly in the wintertime it will be, but as it gets lighter, having that sunshine in the morning is going to be more helpful than the sunshine later in the day.
Yeah, particularly for families, right? Like the crux of a family's day is trying to get kids up and ready for school because parents have their own working schedules. Like, not all families, but many families, like that's the part of the day that has the most acute bottlenecked stress and time management stuff. And having a daylight savings that's shifting ends up, whether people are conscious of or not, it probably disrupts that pattern quite a bit.
Yeah. It's so crazy. It's like 1 hour, but it makes such a big difference. And as a parent with kiddos, myself, like I have to explain, okay, now we have to go to bed earlier, or like all these different things, like it's darker. And it just, how do you explain that to a kid? Like, and frankly, how do you explain it to adults? And that's, I guess, what we're trying to do here. But
Right.
like, why are we going through this insanity? And I think it's all just difference of opinions and priorities. And here we are. So,
For sure. But it's really funny to think about trying to explain this to a kid, right? Like, I think that this is a really useful cognitive tool in our modern society, is because, like, as adults, we sort of think we've mastered certain things. But the moment you try to explain, like, why are we doing this to a child who's just asking that very innocent question of, like, why? And then you have to, like, well, because in 1784, the farming industry, well, the candle industry, people were, we were trying to, well, and now we actually try to get rid of it, but some people didn't want to because of other reasons. Like, it's just, it kind of doesn't make sense for a
mhm.
child who's very in their body, who's very routine based and likes that consistency. So it's
Yeah.
funny to assume that just because we're adults that we don't like that consistency in the same way.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Cause I feel like even though I'm treating a 30, 40, 50-year old, there's still that 5, 10, 10-year old inside that asking the why questions. And we've just added our adult higher level complexity thinking to it, but we still have those questions.
Yeah, and even if we don't have them in a analytical, logical, thinking based way, when our bodies and our nervous system stop functioning in the way that is convenient for us,
Hmm.
usually they default to the ways that our bodies worked as a 5 or 6-year-old child. Um, and it's I think, I mean, I know for myself, at least when I'm working with people and they are having a hard time connecting to what their body is thinking or feeling or doing, I ask them to imagine a 5 or 6-year-old version of themselves being asked these same questions to reflect on, and how might a small version of them respond? Because some people
Yeah.
can access that just so much easier.
And I've also heard, and I don't have like dogs or cats, but I understand that pets can really feel it too.
Mm,
And you can't explain that to a dog. Like it's
right.
they can feel it though, and I don't have any research or anything to support that idea, but that's what
Yeah,
I've heard.
makes sense.
So what? Okay, so we've talked a lot about things. I think you've mentioned some strategies. You were talking about the idea of like if you're traveling to start preparing ahead of time to kind of match the time zone that you're going into.
Yeah,
Um, I'm curious about. So I want to other ideas of things that we can do
yeah.
for people that if you're listening right now, what things you can start doing right now, even the day before, or kind of even in the transition period after. What
Yeah.
can we do to improve our ability to respond to this crazy daylight savings time change? Um, One of the things, and I'm curious your thoughts, is about light, because we have these. The light is really fundamental. We kind of talked about this already.
Mhm.
My thought is that if we can increase the amount of light that we're getting in the early part of the day, it's
Mhm.
waking our brains up. It's telling our body to kind of shift a little bit earlier and have more of the light exposure earlier, and yeah, wake us up more. Something like
Yeah.
that.
Yes, so that's a great one. Like, if you're just going purely off of timing, right, where it's Wednesday, March 4th, we'll be shifting on Saturday evening. I would say you could start going to bed and waking up 15 minutes earlier every day until Sunday, and you'll just sort of be there by that point. So that's just purely mechanical time-wise, but like you said, you can then leverage or amplify this time shift with light. So one of those things too would be, if we're shifting, to be waking up a little bit earlier, means going to bed a little bit earlier. So protecting your eyes from light 15 minutes before bed,
Hmm.
starting this evening, it'd be great that if in the evening when the sun came down, you really turned all your overhead lighting off, maybe you lit some candles, you're just a little more conscious about protecting your eyes from bright light on your way to bed. And then, um, yeah, also being really conscious of when you eat in the morning and when you're moving your body in the morning, sort of starting to shift those schedules to the best of your ability. And then I think it's really great that you asked, like, and what do we do after the fact, too, right? Because we can try to prepare our bodies the best way that we can, no matter what. But even if we take care of our own individual bodies really well, we are in a society where, like, I would guess 99% of everyone else you encounter that day probably didn't prepare the same way that you did. So
Hmm.
things that I would be really, really encouraging folks to think about the days after is give everyone the benefit of the doubt. They're probably crankier than they think they are, and they're probably readjusting. Drive more defensively than you normally would because of the high car crash incidents that happen the day
Yep.
after. Um, and also make sure if you can and have the flexibility to do so, prioritize more intentional food and movement the couple days afterwards to just help bolster that body's ability to get back online. Yeah.
Yeah.
What about you? Is there anything that you would add in there that I left out?
Yeah. I think the one thing I got my little light machine
Oh,
here, like
yes.
just using it,
Use it. Yeah.
on more, and I think the benefit I mentioned kind of before the daylight savings, but even after, like we're switching from a period of light in the early morning to a period of dark,
Yeah.
and by adding this extra supplemental light through a light machine, or just turn the lights on, if you don't have one, just turn the lights on and kind of try to wake your brain up earlier, like, and that's going to, I think, help with that transition. um I
Yeah.
think about, we talked about cortisol, we talked about stress, there's all these antioxidant, their oxidation is a big, plays a big role in kind of inflammation type processes. So I'm thinking about things like vitamin C or quercetin or NAC, glutathione. All of these things can help with decreasing any oxygen radicals or other things that just kind of get out of place.
Mhm.
We know that extra vitamin C um, can boost the immune system.
Yes.
Um, as I'm talking, I'm just thinking about all of the things that I talk about with patients as like how to just stay healthy or how to get healthy quickly. Um, and this is actually a really interesting idea as vitamin D. Now, we talk about vitamin D as coming from the sun, and we it really is just the way that the molecules are processed in our skin with UV light.
Yeah.
Here in Missoula, Montana, and probably everywhere else that has a high northern latitude, we're not going to be getting enough vitamin D from the sun. But we do know that vitamin D can help play a role with strengthening the immune system, reducing the risk of infections, just like so many neurological, cellular functions. I'd be thinking about, boosting your vitamin D just for a few days. It's not going to hurt by taking a double dose over the few days before and after. I'm thinking like that's what I would recommend to patients who are maybe sick or kind of coming down with a cold. Like, let's boost the vitamin D to give your body that extra leverage through
Mhm.
this transition. If you treat it, I guess I'm just, as I'm talking, what if we treated daylight savings time like a cold? How would you strengthen your body in a cold? It's the
That's
same type of stress.
It is. I mean, I think that's another under talked about thing with it's like stress is stress. Stress doesn't have like different major categories. Like emotional stress shows up in the body the same way that a cold does, the same way that daylight savings does. Like it's all the
Mhm.
same in many facets, not exactly, but the the physiological mechanisms are the same.
Yeah.
And the when I'm working with folks also, that is also the way that if people are having a hard time conceptualizing how to be really caring towards their body, I say, pretend you have a massive hangover or pretend you're actually sick with the flu. What are the two ways you would like be really kind to your body on the days that you have your worst flu symptoms, or if you woke up with a horrible hangover and you really couldn't function that day? What would you do? And
Yeah.
most people automatically will take more vitamin C, drink electrolytes, lay down and rest, maybe get a light walk in. They'll try to get some sunshine. Like, we all know, we just forget.
Completely. Yeah, and yeah, I love how you're differentiating like that. Well, not differentiating. Stress is stress, and whether it's a big project at work, whether it's family dynamics, whether that's a cold, whether it's time change, we've got stress, um, and there's we just need to support our body in that, and I think I would recommend that if anyone is wanting to really dive into their own adrenal function, talk to your provider, talk to a naturopathic doctor like myself or somebody else that you can get some more individualized help. We can
Yeah.
test hormones, we can test cortisol, and that kind of guides like, okay, is it really low like 90% of people are, or is it maybe high? You're one of the anomalies where your cortisol levels are actually just high. And also, how does it change throughout the day? Is it really as high as it needs to be in the morning? And is it
Yes.
low as it needs to be in the night to help us kind of wind down and get ready for bed? So just kind of like, we can't obviously talk about everything in this kind of discussion today, but continue that conversation with your healthcare provider um, to do that. Um, a couple other thoughts I've kind of wondering about is melatonin, because melatonin is this amazing like hormone that's secreted by the pineal gland, which is a like pea-sized thing in our brain,
Yeah.
and it basically melatonin increases when darkness hits our eyes. The lack of light is what triggers melatonin, and melatonin also acts as an antioxidant, which is pretty cool to help kind of calm down inflammation and stuff in the brain.
That's cool.
um one of the There's some different ideas on how to use it. Usually it's always before bed, not like immediately right before you go to bed, but like the 30 to 60 minutes before you go to bed.
Yeah.
Well, even low doses can make a difference.
Yeah.
And there's some philosophies that I need to look into some more myself, is taking it 5 to 6 hours before bed that
Mm.
can kind of help prepare the body for sleep at a very low dose. And I don't know the mechanism of that. I would need to think about that some more. Any experience with you and melatonin in the sleep world?
Oh my gosh, so much. It's really interesting. It's all over the place. And I always just like to caveat this with like, I'm never discouraging people from using the tools that work for them. It's
Hmm.
about understanding the broad variety of tools and then making a conscious choice to choose the one that works for us. So, one of the things with melatonin nowadays is that people can take it at a really high dose that is exponentially larger than our body naturally processes. And then when we do that over long periods of time, our body actually stops producing that hormone itself on its own without the external supplementation. And so
Hmm.
that actually can dysregulate our circadian rhythm long term.
Yep.
So I always encourage folks when they're using melatonin to be really intentional about when they start using melatonin, or if they're continuing to use it, to really pair that melatonin use with other signals that you're getting ready to wind down for the day. So matching it with some kind of behavioral tool. There's also some really interesting research, and some people, this deflates them like a rubber balloon, and some people are like, oh, that makes sense, and it feels more supportive. So depends
Hmm.
on the listener, I guess. But most research shows that melatonin, on average, only helps people fall asleep 4 to 8 minutes faster than they normally would without it.
Interesting.
It is interesting. And this is why it can feel deflating to some people, because some people have used their melatonin like a silver bullet. They feel like they cannot fall asleep without it. And then when I say that statistic, they're like, it like deflates the entire idea that it's because of the melatonin that they're falling asleep at all. Then they have to start to face more behavioral things or emotional things. The other thing about it is, though, is the average on sleep onset latency for a person is 15 to 20 minutes. So 4 minutes is actually a pretty substantial amount of time if you are someone who has a very hard time falling asleep.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a pretty good proportion of that normal sleep onset latency, and it can make a massive difference from people who are so close to having sleep health where they want it to be, and they just need a little rocket boost to get there.
Yeah.
So those people who like that, who are maybe falling asleep for 30, takes them 30 minutes, that 4 minutes can be the tipping point from them having a healthy sleep onset latency versus one that feels distressing to them.
Mm. Yeah.
So again, depends on the sleeper. One of the coolest things that I have found out in the recent years about melatonin specifically is that instead of taking an external supplement like a melatonin supplement, is that if you eat kiwi fruit or drink tart cherry juice or eat dried tart cherries, you're actually increasing your own internal melatonin production. So you're not worried about that same response where your body then stops working on it. You're actually enhancing the body's natural response already.
Yeah. And I'm going to butcher this stat, but it's something there. We have a lot of neurotransmitters in our brain are actually also produced in our gut. And I
Yeah.
think it's really cool. And one of those is melatonin. Melatonin is derived from tryptophan, which ultimately makes 5-HTP. 5-HTP makes serotonin. There's another one after serotonin that goes to melatonin. And I think the number is that there's like 400 times the amount of melatonin produced in the gut than there is in the brain.
Cool. I did not know that. That's super
Something
interesting.
along those lines. And like it is possible to take the precursor tryptophan as a supplement, and I not just extra turkey, because that's, I think, a myth in and of itself,
Yeah.
at Thanksgiving. But I think, where was I going with that thought? Improving digestion, improving our body's ability to, yeah, what can regulate what we're eating, and using food as medicine in this regard.
Yeah.
And as you're saying that, I am reminded of things along the lines of tart cherry juice and things like that. I think that is a great avenue that's not pharmaceutical. It's not even a supplement. It's food.
It's just food.
And you can't get, and granted, you can't get the cheap like
Yeah.
ocean
Like cocktail
spray
juice. Yeah.
cranberry stuff that's 1% juice and 99% water and corn syrup. Like, you need like the glass bottle, costs $6 a bottle, kind of a like hardcore juice to get the benefit.
You do. And I've actually been nerding out in the last couple of years about how do you even further improve this process if you grow your own tart cherry trees and then process the juice
Mm.
yourself and have a relationship with like the plant that's actually giving you the food. Because, right, you have more investment on taking it at the right time. There's more of an investment to actually use it as its appropriate use if you can only rely on the tart cherries being in season at a certain time of year and processing them appropriately. And the tart cherries grow extremely well in high, like the 45th parallel and above. They're really a largely producing fruit tree up here. So
Yep.
uh, anyone who's in our sort of geo region could
Mm-hmm.
probably start the process or work with a local farmer or work with some kind of local community garden to try to grow your own. It's not that difficult. Yeah.
Or just take a drive up from Polson to Big Fork on the east side of Flathead Lake, and you get all of these cherry farms and orchards. It's awesome. I'm curious how many would be sweet versus tart, but that's we need to figure
Yeah,
that out.
totally.
I love that idea of like bringing mindfulness, and I've often talked about mindful eating, and just
Yes.
bringing presence, mental presence to the eating aspect as way of calming our vagus nerve, calming like strengthening our, well, I guess strengthening our vagus nerve, strengthening our parasympathetic rest and digest processes. And I love the idea of doing that with cooking, and by extension,
Yes.
what you're talking about with the preparing our own tart cherry juice. Certainly, not everyone's going to be able to do that.
No,
Especially if you live in a rental or something that you can't grow your own tree in your backyard. By all means, but I think is for those who are able or have the opportunity, it's this extra dimension of mindfulness just in life in general.
that's right. And what we know of many of like sleep issues in particular is that our parasympathetic brakes and like gas pedals are part of what is creating the physiological disruption that increases our stress. So, we might have a sympathetic nervous system, that fight or flight response that works well enough, mostly appropriately. It turns on and off at the right time. But our parasympathetic nervous system, that rest and digest system, doesn't have a sensitive enough on and off button. It turns
Hmm.
off really easily, typically, but it does not turn on very easily. And so mindfulness is us training it to turn itself on more often and more quickly.
Hmm. I love how we went from daylight savings to mindfulness. It's awesome. Um, I think, and one other aspect of that is kind of another kind of strategy for dealing with this time change. Um, is the work by someone named Donna Eden. I don't know if you're familiar with the idea of energy medicine.
No, I'm not.
She wrote this book, Donna Eden. I know she's. You can find videos about her on YouTube. She wrote a book called Energy Medicine, and it's really talking about the energy of our body. And this kind of gets a little esoteric for somebody who might be really hardcore, like molecules or hardcore science or things like that. But we think about, even from a Chinese perspective, there's these energy meridians, these highways, where our vitality flows along, in lack of a
Mhm.
better term. And through simple movements, even just tapping on different points of our
Yeah.
body. There's emotional freedom technique tapping. And I'll include some of these resources in the video description for anyone who's interested. EFT tapping can really like stimulate those points at which you would otherwise maybe stick an acupuncture needle, but you're really just tapping on it. Even motions like cross crawl, like standing up and opposite elbow, knee to hand, um, movements like that, and Donna Eden goes into all of this, can really help shift our body clock from an energetic standpoint an hour earlier or later. She has some great resources on jet lag that I've tried to use when I've traveled, and I feel like it works as well as it can. Um, so just thinking about that in that regard as well.
Yeah, I think that that's great things to think about with all of this. I mean, it's all connected, right? The knee bone is connected to the melatonin producing pineal gland. Everybody knows that classic song.
Yep. Yep. Awesome. What else do we miss? I feel like we've covered so much.
Yeah, I think we've covered quite a lot. I'm trying to think if there's anything else, especially specific to daylight savings or like springtime in general. I mean, I really think like the only other practical thing that I can think of that's easy and behavioral, especially if people are coming out of this, like have a harder time mobilizing in the spring, is many folks are following a lot of these like gold standard sleep hygiene tips these days, and that includes things like blackout curtains and face masks and all these things. But in the spring, when we're coming out of such a hard season of darkness, I really like to remind people this is actually probably the time of year where you want to have your curtains open, where you want to skip the eye mask. And when you go outside first thing in the morning, you actually don't want your sunglasses on. I wouldn't recommend people wear sunglasses until we start getting more towards that summer season,
Mhm.
because we're really starved for, like you said, that vitamin D. We're starved for that circadian rhythm hitting the suprachiasmatic nucleus in the morning, where the more light, the better. If we could just play with one thing, it's the more light, the better. And Similarly, although not quite as powerful as the light, is heat. And so if people are really struggling to get up this time of year, especially around daylight savings when it just jumbles us all up, if you have a heated blanket in possession already, or you have a heating pad, a great way to force yourself awake is to overheat yourself to point of discomfort. Because you can't stay in a deep layer of sleep if you're too hot. Your core
Mm-hmm.
temperature has to be below a certain threshold. So if you're one of those people who's really struggling this time of year, when your first alarm goes off, crank your heated pad or heated blanket up all the way. And I promise you, you won't be able to sleep in that much longer.
Yep. Yep.
So,
And I think my last thought is with any change in life, like be kind to yourself.
yes.
I know it might be obvious, and I think you're a big proponent of this as well,
Yeah.
but just that self-love, self-care. Um, I think we often get hard on ourselves for waking up on Monday morning after daylight savings, feeling groggy, feeling horrible. Um, no, we can't ourselves change daylight savings time. That's an act of Congress, which sometimes is harder to do than other things in life. But we can control how much we love ourselves and how much that kindness we by showing our love to ourselves, by just thinking positively, giving ourselves that benefit of a doubt, not just other
Yes.
people.
Yes.
We're able to kind of calm down that sympathetic nervous system. We're able to boost that parasympathetic nervous system. We're able to allow all of these body processes to connect and work more optimally. Um, and we're able to just get ourselves back on track. It might take a week, and that's okay. And after a week, we're just not going to notice that daylight savings happened, but it gives us an opportunity to transition more mindfully, more presently, and with more love for ourselves and others.
I
So,
could not agree more. I'm so glad you remembered to bring that in because it does. It takes a while. It takes anywhere. Anytime we go through a very major shift, our sleep can take 1 to 6 weeks to recalibrate after that. So yeah, be gentle.
yeah, I've loved this conversation. Dagny and I have talked about doing more of this. So if you're interested, drop us a comment. Like, what would you love to hear two neuroscience nerds talk about in context of health and sleep, or every natural medicine, things like that? Let us know. I'm also going to drop the information for Dagny in the description, along with if you're interested in working with me here at Natura. Um, we have both of us have lots of tools. We share several patients now that we're working on. I'm doing some more naturopathic things. Dagny's doing more sleep support, and it's a really great synergy. So let us know what questions you have. How can we pique your curiosity? And we will hopefully see you on the next episode of this discussions. Have a great day, everybody. Sleep well, love yourself through daylight savings, and we'll see you on the flip side. Have a great day.